This is the What the Speak podcast with Brian Kelly. I'm John Corcoran.
What the Speak, episode 45. Drop it.
Do you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch? If not, these expert discussions and insider tips can help you right now, today. Welcome to the What the Speak podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kelly.
If you don't speak with passion and clarity while inspiring confidence, I'll walk you through an approach I've used to generate over 7 figures in revenue and quadruple my income. Join me live on March 20th for the Presentation Profit Formula, a free training I've created to help increase your income, authority, and influence through better communication. Here's what you'll learn in this action-packed training. First, I'll talk about my 5 P's of a perfect presentation that converts your audience into sales. Next, we'll uncover simple techniques to boost confidence and reduce filler words like and ah. Lastly, we'll look at how to create a sexy presentation that builds instant credibility and positions you as the authority in your field. This stuff is so good, I should probably charge a few $100s for it, but since you're a subscriber, I want to hook you up. If you're finally ready to realize your full potential and become a better communicator, go to whatthespeak.com/formula. Make sure to sign up and I'll see you there. John Corcoran, are you ready to answer the question, what the speak?
I will do my best, my friend.
All right. That's good enough for me.
Good.
So, John, you are my first attorney on the show, and you're not just any attorney. You're what they call in Northern California a super lawyer.
You have done your research.
But I would love to hear it directly from you. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll dive into our discussion.
I can do that as long as you don't ask me to get out the cape.
All right.
Then I'm cool
I
with
won't.
that. Okay, good. Background. Well, I'm kind of unusual in that I have a strange background. So at about 23 years old, I got my dream job, basically. I got a job as a writer in the Clinton White House. And I was kind of like a B-team speechwriter. We kind of wrote all the stuff that the speechwriters didn't want to write, like video scripts and proclamations and things like that. It was a tremendous experience. I went for a ride after that in politics and worked as a speechwriter to the governor of California. And then I also worked in the entertainment industry for DreamWorks. And I worked in Silicon Valley, in the heart of Silicon Valley, across the street from eBay. And now I have my own boutique law firm catering to entrepreneurs and small business owners. And I help them with whatever they need, mostly trying to keep them out of trouble. And so my background, though, is as a writer and as a speechwriter. And that's how I kind of come full circle. And then today I have a blog called Smart Business Revolution, where I share some of my thoughts on how the common thread amongst all those businesses and all those different jobs and different industries really was relationships. Every position I ever got was because of a relationship that I had. And relationships are even more important in today's service-based economy, having good relationships. So I write a lot about that at my blog.
Awesome. So, John, let's talk a little bit more about kind of your background, your origins in speech writing, and how that kind of ties into just general communication skills that we'll dive into more specifically. But I was curious, you'd mentioned that you were in the Clinton White House administration as a speechwriter. Not too long ago, I interviewed Dan Pink, who was Clinton's chief speechwriter, and I was wondering, did you have any interaction there with him during that time?
Yeah, he was a speechwriter up through about 97. So around the time I came in as an intern in the speechwriting office was around the time that he was departing. But I've had him on my podcast twice, and we've talked about it, and we know a lot of people in common. And I honestly don't remember if we met. We probably met at some point early on. So
that's funny.
Yeah.
Well, great. I think that there's a lot of really good things and insights that we can learn from that experience. And really one of the reasons why I was very interested in talking with you to uncover some of those things. So let's talk about specifically, how did you get into speech writing? Obviously you're a lawyer now and you do a lot of really great things, which we will talk about. But tell us about this journey that you were on as a speechwriter. How did that come to be when you were in your college years? And what were some of the lessons that you pulled out of that?
Well, I was an English major in college, and like many people graduating from college with an English major, there aren't many jobs that are designed for English majors.
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted to be a writer, but no one was going to write me to start writing novels or pay me to start writing novels or nonfiction books at that point. So I looked around, and I worked as an intern in the Clinton White House while I was in college, and I kept in touch with a number of speechwriters and other people who worked in the White House. And just when a job opening came along, I just jumped on it and was fortunate enough to get it. Timing is interesting, so kind of cute or interesting little story from that. That I had heard about this position, and I knew I'd be getting a call from the woman who was hiring for it. And I was working in the entertainment industry in LA at the time. And the day that she called me to call me about the job and ask me about it, ask me for my resume and writing samples and stuff like that, I actually was able to say to her, I'll send you some writing samples, but actually, if you want to check out the New York Times op-ed page, I actually have a letter to the editor in today's paper. It's totally fortuitous timing, but I kind of knew that this was coming up, and I'd sent in a letter like a week or two earlier, and it just happened to land on that day. So sometimes timing is just, works out well for you. So that's how I ended up there. And then I went from there to the governor's office in California, which is where I'm from. I live here in the San Francisco Bay Area now. I wanted to get back to California. And so that was a natural landing spot after that.
So when you're writing a speech, a lot of presenters, and especially one of the things that we talk about a lot with several of the guests on the show is being able to speak from a place of passion and the knowledge that you have. And doing so in a way that's natural, organic, etc. But the art of speech writing is quite different. And some of the greatest speeches in history, obviously, were written beforehand and prepared, rehearsed, etc. Can you give us just some high level things that when you were in those early days of writing speeches for politicians, what was like the structure that you were following? What were some of the ways that you in your writing would accentuate different points? Because I think there's some really great lessons that we can learn from that.
Sure. There's a lot in that, and there's a lot involved in writing a good speech. I think that they're definitely very different, but they're organically intertwined. In other words, the best speech is one that comes out sounding natural, but at the same time doesn't sound like something that someone just pontificates. If you actually take a transcription of our conversation here today, there aren't clear paragraphs, there aren't clear sentences. We tend to speak in sentence fragments. And to a certain extent, that's helpful in today's modern style of speaking because we don't speak as formally as we used to. If you go back and you look at speeches from Teddy Roosevelt or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or Abraham Lincoln, they're a lot more formal. Today, they're a lot more casual, a lot more informal, a lot more conversational. So there's a lot more of a connection between the speech draft and the speaker, and it's a lot more naturally twined. But some of the things that are important to do is to practice, just like speaking, practice writing speeches, to rehearse really frequently. If it's going to be a big speech, to do it over and over again. Another tip I've written about, some different articles I've written, is to get comfortable with the room, certainly. Wherever you're going to be delivering the speech, that can have a big impact on it. This is a little speechwriter tip here, is a lot of times people write out these speeches in 12-point font, so they got this little thing that they're trying to read from, 18-point font, 20-point font, very wide margins. Those little things will make a tremendous amount of difference. And then, of course, the old saying is, tell them what you're going to say, tell them it, and then tell them what you just said. And, we're bombarded with information these days. And so you're lucky if a couple of messages can get through. And so a lot of times speakers try and cram way too much information in there. If you can, put it in a handout and hand it out to people and try and leave your remarks for just a few key lessons or points so that you don't cram everything in there and just overwhelm everyone.
Yeah, that's some great stuff. And I think it is important to think about how you're structuring the content. as you said today, it's probably a lot more acceptable to be casual, to be conversational, but that's still not an excuse to just get up there and wing it and kind of ramble what it is that you want to share. Being able to think through beforehand what those key points are that you're going to cover, and just like you said, very simply telling them what you're going to tell them what you're telling them, and then repeat that one more time so that they get it and it sticks. Very simple structure, something that has been used quite often, time and time again, but really allows you to create those hooks that people, will stick into people's minds and memories, so that when they leave, whatever that presentation is that you delivered or that message that you shared, they'll remember it and hopefully be inspired or take action in some way.
Right. And, I don't believe that you should script an entire speech almost ever, almost never. I mean, State of the Union, State of the State, those types of big speeches are scripted. But really, bullet points usually work well, and so that you can kind of guide yourself as you go along. But the thing is, you may have individual points that you want to make along the way, right? And you want to back those up with stories, anecdotes, or statistics, or examples. And those things don't come to you on the fly,
right?
Unless it's something that you've been talking about over and over again, in which case you might have some kind of, speech down where you can just get up there and wing it. But where I see people making mistakes is when they get up and they give a speech and they're just kind of winging it, and they don't back up their points. Like, they might just kind of pontificate and just give opinion the whole time. And that kind of drives me crazy. It's just opinion after opinion after opinion after opinion. They're not backing it up with any examples or any stories that are relevant. It just kind of drops. And so that's where you can kind of structure your remarks, where you have the individual points that you want to make, 3, 4, 5 points, whatever it is, and then you insert the stories and the anecdotes and the support that you want to include in there, so that it's a lot more engaging for the audience, and it's a way for them to access the information better.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's important too that you balance your opinion. I think making your opinion known is an important aspect of it, but then being able to back it up with data is something that just provides some balance, as well as throwing in those stories, those anecdotes, et cetera, that have the human element. Really creates a nice, well-rounded presentation or speech. So some really good stuff here, John.
Yeah.
Okay, now I would love to talk about kind of your specific expertise in a couple of different areas. And the first is, I know that you've written a number of great resources for people related to public speaking. And there's one that you recently wrote that's all about the 7 tips basically to get over the fear of public speaking. Can you share with us just a couple of those, some tips for those individuals in the audience that are watching this right now that maybe has a desire to get over that fear that they've got? What are some real quick things that they can do to be prepared for the next time they get in front of an audience?
Okay, so a couple of quick things. One, a couple I mentioned already, having a larger font in front of you guarantees you that you have this safety blanket in front of you. So if you get nervous, you can always go back to that. And I think that's important to have, rather than just getting up there without anything, or maybe just scribbled notes on a piece of paper. Having that security blanket is definitely helpful. Practicing in advance, coming to the room beforehand, maybe the day before, and getting comfortable with the podium, where everything's located, where the water is going to be located, making sure you're familiar with the agenda, when you're going to be speaking, who you're going to be speaking with, if you're going to be asked questions, if you're going to have to take questions from the audience. All those things are really relevant. Another thing, this is a good trick I like, is if you're really nervous about it, give the audience a handout. There's a couple of reasons why to do that. One, half the audience is going to be looking down at that. Rather than looking up at you, they're going to be looking down at that. Yeah. So that kind of takes some of the pressure off. Secondly, it's a gift. And the natural inclination when you give a gift to someone is for them to go a little bit easier on you because you've done something. So it's done something nice for them. So it may lead to the audience just having a nicer feeling for you when you get up there. Another trick I like is, if you have the chance to do this, depending on how the size of the room is, meet people as they walk in the door. The reason people a lot of times are nervous about speaking from an audience is a bunch of strangers. Well, make them not strangers. Stand at the door and shake everyone's hand as they're walking in. Hi, I'm so and so. I'm going to be your speaker. And also, this is another good one, asking people in advance what they want to hear you talk about. And doing that research further in advance is even better.
Yep.
The audit at the door is one thing, but a lot of times people just kind of guess at what they should be talking about. So they just kind of get up there and they speak. And it turns out the audience is really concerned about something else. There's something else that they want to hear from that speaker about. So making sure you've done your research in advance, either earlier or at the door, is a great way to kind of lessen some of those nerves.
Yeah, I mean, several of those things I've used myself personally over the years. And I think the one thing that I've recommended to a lot of people is, especially if you're just getting started, is to literally write out what it is that you want to say. So maybe it's a 20-minute presentation. Go ahead and script out what that is, rehearse it, memorize it, and then just you have to practice it several times. And I'm talking at least maybe 8 to 10 hours worth of time into this. Because what will happen then is, while you're practicing that and you're going through that motion of relaying that script, it will become ingrained into your psyche, and the message that you have will be very clear and to the point because you've got that in your head. Now, what I recommend then is don't get up there and rehearse or bring it back to the audience verbatim. Let that it's the information's in your head. Speak to it in a way that is going to be able to deliver that message, but you're getting away from that script, and that way it becomes a lot more natural. And as you do that over and over and over, and get more and more experience, then you're able to let go of that and transition to a place where you've just got some key bullets that you've laid out, or maybe you've worked on your slide presentation where there's some visual cues and some headlines to the different points that you've got that are their support material, but it's all in your head, and you've just absorbed the information in a way that you can deliver it back to the audience, and it's natural. Now, I see a lot of people when they're first getting started with this, where they are literally verbatim relaying this script that they wrote out. And if you start there, that's fine. The audience will be able to tell that you are kind of reading a script or reading back a script to them. And that's something that over a period of time where you're practicing and getting better and better at this, you'll feel more and more comfortable, and that's okay. But you want to make sure that, as a rule of thumb, that you're not just relaying a script, because it will seem robotic and stiff and will be something that your audience likely will not be able to connect with.
It drives me crazy when someone's just up there reading a script. I mean, it's just one of those things. You just kind of have a tendency to be like, you know what? I don't want to listen to a person just read this script. I want to listen to someone talk. It'll be like someone standing across from you and reading a script to you. I mean, you want more of a dialogue going on here. And the other tip that I'd add to your advice, which is excellent, is if you have, let's say you've written out a script and it's 10 pages, knocking it down to 5, then knock it down to 2, then knock it down to 1, and then maybe rebuild it. That will really distill the points that you have. And you might find that there's all kinds of extraneous stuff that you have in there that really is not necessary. Narrow it down to a 1-page outline that you can have in front of you, and maybe even like little cryptic notes that will just be little reminders, tell the story about my dog or whatever, in there. And that's a great way to make sure that you understand the structure of the speech.
Well, that's definitely a pitfall for a lot of folks just getting started, as well as you want to cram as much information as you can into, if it's a 20, 30 minute, 45-minute presentation, however long it is, you feel like you've got to put everything that you know into that and share with the audience. And really, it's got to be so distilled down, like you're saying, like start with 10 pages and get it down to 1 page, because there's one major thing that you're going to want your audience to take away. And if you start throwing a bunch of other things in there, they can't remember it all. They'll start zoning out and their eyes will glaze over. And it's something that's difficult. We always have a tendency to cram more in than's natural or appropriate. And it's something that if you can resist that, not only is it going to be great for your audience, but for you as the person delivering that message, it creates a lot less stress because you're not having to remember all these different things. There's one clear point, with probably 3 sub points that support that idea, but that's all you have to think about.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. It's like being a teacher. When you're a teacher, you've got to teach to every level in the classroom. There are people that are really far advanced, and there are people that are really slow. And oftentimes, speakers try and speak to the really advanced people by cramming a ton of information in there, while the rest of the audience is just missing it. It's just going over their head, or you're going too fast. So slowing it down, which is something I'm not very good at, slowing it down and trying to pace yourself and let those points seep in with your audience is really valuable.
Awesome. Well, again, some really good stuff, John. I want to wrap up our discussion, just kind of going through some key things, some rapid fire questions, if you will. So the first thing that comes to your mind, let me know. So for you, and especially somebody that's coming from a speechwriter background in your early days of your career, do you prefer slides or no slides?
Good question. Depends on the context. I personally have used both. I prefer a handout because then there are different types of learners in the audience. There's some people who are going to follow along with you as you're going, and there are other people who need to take it home with them, want to have that information, which they might not get with the PowerPoint the slides.
Perfect. Okay, so as somebody who's been behind the scenes with some really great communicators, for you personally, who is someone that's out there that's a presenter, a speaker that you admire the most, and why?
Well, honestly, because of my background in politics, my old boss, Bill Clinton, was, undeniably one of the greatest. I mean, he just has an amazing way with him. If you have ever seen him speak in person, he has an incredible ability. The other one I'd mention, and there are going to be some people in the audience who probably think I'm crazy for making this suggestion, but one of the best speakers I've ever seen is Howard Dean. Howard Dean, who ran for president in 2004. And just an amazing speaker. He had that cadence down and could just keep an audience wrapped around his finger. Just had an amazing ability to hit all the points and go up in tone and slow things down and get people excited and slow them down again. Just had a real natural ability about him. So honestly, one of the best speakers I've seen.
Awesome. Yeah, Howard Dean, I remember him from back in the day, and I may have to go back and see if there's some videos on YouTube because I've never really thought of him in that way.
Well, yeah, I mean, now people think of him for his downfall, which was the Scream, which was I think it was, he just lost the Iowa primary, and he was giving his concession speech, and it was just crazy wild in the room, but that came off across TV as being a little too nutty, which gets to actually the importance of speaking to two audiences. Probably most people are not having their speeches broadcast live across national TV, but it could be transmitted into another room, maybe if you have an overflow crowd. And so or it could be people that are in the back of the room versus the front of the room, or it could be different people who've got different ages, young people, older people. So it's important to acknowledge that there are different types of audiences that you're speaking to.
Absolutely. So I usually love to ask my guests, what's the craziest, funniest thing that you've ever experienced? Maybe something bizarre or unusual while giving a presentation. Is there anything kind of in your experience, your background, that you can share that's kind of out of the ordinary?
I was thinking about that, and actually what I wanted to share was a story that people may not have heard of. This is actually about Clinton in his first State of the Union. So he'd been president for less than 2 months. And, of course, the nerves are up and everything. And I can't remember if it was a State of the Union or economic address, but he had 2 big speeches before Congress in the House of Representatives in the first 2 months. One had to do with the economy, one had to do with the State of the Union. And so this was the second of the 2. So he'd gone down there, teleprompter, everything, national TV, given the speech, everything. The next time, for the next speech, he was a procrastinator. He would get everything, be working on a speech, tinkering with it until the last minute. It was driving the speechwriters crazy. And so they're working on the speech, making different changes and everything. Keep in mind, technology is also, this is 20 years ago, so the computers are more ancient. And so they're getting it done at the last minute and putting it on a floppy disk or whatever, to bringing it down there. And they rush on down to the Capitol and they get in there, load the speech and everything. He gets up there, applause, 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 gets up there ready to speak. And on the teleprompter appears the old speech. The speech that he'd given 2 months earlier. And so he signaled over to one of his aides, who signaled to one of the speechwriters and said, it's the wrong speech. And they had to run around to find the speech and fix it in the teleprompter. And and Clinton, because he'd been practicing it for weeks, started giving the speech from memory, just like you mentioned.
Yep.
He had it ingrained in his mind. He started giving the speech. Meanwhile, the other speech is zipping by on the teleprompter while he's giving this speech until it could catch up. And then it catches up about a half an hour into the speech. And then he catches right on and you'd never notice. And he continues going from there. But that does go to show the importance of really taking a speech and getting comfortable with it and not exactly memorizing it, but having it be a part of you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's such a good lesson, and I think it's a testament to somebody who now, when he gives a keynote speech, gets paid a couple $100,000 to come and give that keynote. He's just such a master communicator.
Mm-hmm. Right.
All right. So, John, I would love to talk with you real quick about what's the impact that your background and experiences with speaking and communicating has had on your career and your business.
It's been everything for me because it was one of my first jobs out of college. And so ever since then, it's been my background. But I think that focusing on the spoken word early on in my career was really helpful because, now I'm an attorney. Now I appear in court, or now I need to communicate an abstract concept to a client who's not a lawyer and be able to explain it in a way that they understand. And oftentimes that's what you're doing. When you're giving a speech, it's because you got authority and expertise on something that the audience doesn't. You understand it in a way that is abstract, and you need to bring it down to their level and explain and communicate it to them. And that's valuable in so many different things these days. Like Dan Pink writes about the importance of communicating over email these days, and persuading people over email. Well, those skills can be helpful to help the practice that you get from giving a speech or from writing a speech can be helpful these days in just communicating to someone over email. So it's been incredibly helpful for me these days to have that background and to be able to use it, whether I'm in court or talking to a client or whatever.
Beautiful. Well, John, one last question before we wrap it up, and that is, what advice would you give somebody today, just getting started, maybe their first presentation or speeches in a couple of weeks, from all the experiences that you've been through yourself? What's that one thing that you would share?
I think the number one thing would be, don't let, if this is really, really new to you, don't let that big thing be the first time that you're going up there and sharing that information. Likely it's not. You've probably shared the information in other venues, but gather together 3 or 4 of your friends. Tell them to come over to your house and just sit in your living room and put a podium up. Put a bunch of books on a table or something like that. Make it like a podium and deliver your speech well in advance so that they can give you feedback and say which parts you need to improve on, which parts worked, which parts didn't. So often the response of someone who doesn't speak often, who needs to give a speech, is procrastination or to put it off or to just kind of wing it. And that just makes it so much worse. Just grabbing the bull by the horns and practicing in advance, getting something written in advance, and then getting that crucial feedback from people in a less pressure-filled setting is going to make the actual experience of giving the speech far, far better.
I love it. John, I thank you so much for your time. You've given us some really great actionable takeaways from our conversation and discussion. We're going to have links to your website, your social media accounts, any of the resources that we talked about over at whatthespeak.com in the show notes. And again, thanks for sharing your personal story, your journey, and some of the really, really unique experiences that you've had in your career as a communicator and a speechwriter, and now as an attorney.
Great. Thank you, Brian.
Are you working out right now or listening to this episode while driving? If so, I know you're not able to leave a rating and review in iTunes at the moment. However, next time you're in front of your computer or smartphone, could you be sure to do so? Just go to whatthespeak.com/audio or whatthespeak.com/video. Thanks so much for your support.
All right, here we go with the outro.
Thanks so much for joining us today on What to Speak. Be sure to visit whatthespeak.com for show notes on every episode and to sign up for our email list to stay updated on resources that'll help you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch.